Hello, everyone. Welcome to IAB There, our regular streaming show in which we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. My name is Eric John. I'm the Vice President of IAB's Media Center. This episode is sponsored by T-Mobile Marketing Services. T-Mobile's Magenta marketing platform uses the power of mobility data to connect brands with their best customers, combining high-quality data signals with premium digital environments. Magenta delivers actionable, engaging, and measurable experiences. And Magenta, by the way, is exactly between red and blue as a color. A little factoid to kick it off. So on today's show, we're excited to speak with our special guest, Tony Marlow. He's the CMO of IAS, Integral Ad Science. We're going to be discussing the evolution of contextual targeting and how Integral Ad Science is expanding beyond verification to focus on media quality. First, just a little background on Tony. He as Chief Marketing Officer for IAS, leads all aspects of corporate marketing strategy, product marketing and brand development and communications for the company. Prior to joining IAS, he was the CMO for the big data company Data Axle. Prior to that, he was global head and vice president of B2B marketing at Yahoo, where we overlapped a little bit. He oversaw all B2B marketing strategy, product marketing, sales, learning, etc. He previously led custom research for Nielsen Online APAC, and he's a guy that leans in. He's served on IAB's board of directors for our research council. He's been on the board of directors for our video center and the media ratings council. And in his spare time, he happens to be an Ironman triathlete. And we were just laughing before the start of this. He's one of those triathletes that actually has done the swimming in New York's Hudson River. So we're talking to a true badass. Tony, great to have you on.
Eric, thank you so much for having me. It's just such a pleasure to participate. And I must say, I definitely do not recommend touching the Hudson, but it is a great race, that New York City Triathlon.
It is that's what's great about New York. If you've done the marathon, I think the triathlon just juices it up even more. Anyway, let's set the stage for our conversation by outlining what we mean by contextual. Can you share your thoughts on that? Because it's been around as a term and as a strategy for years, but what in your mind is contextual today versus those early days?
Yeah, and that's actually a really critical place to start, because as I see it, there are a couple of flavors of how you can define context and contextual. The way I see it, basically you have avoidance. So you start to get into a conversation around what is that content? What are those contexts that are not right for my brand, either on a safety basis or a suitability basis? But regardless, it's about what should I avoid so that I can best represent the values of my brand or not misrepresent them. And then what you, especially right now, and it happens to be one of the hottest topics, and I'm sure we'll dive into it in a little bit more detail, but when we're talking about contextual, increasingly people in our industry are thinking more about targeting. And that is to say, how do I find those contextual adjacencies for my digital campaign that are really going to push the performance of the campaign and very much represent what my brand does stand for? So rather than focusing on just avoiding content, I think a big part of the game now is about finding those contexts that are really going to drive outcomes for your brand.
Something interesting too to dig into a little bit, I think, would be when people think about contextual, advertising in context, what does the supply mean for you as a partner with publishers in managing their content and adjacencies for brands around that, what's the range of supply that you work with?
Yeah, it's funny, and I actually like to take, and I'll sidestep it for a moment, but I will get back to your question. I think the history of this is really important when we talk about the history of targeting. Period,
Hmm.
with regard to digital media. In the early days, it was very much about contextual. And when you talk about scale, what was fast, and back in the day, it would be do insertion orders, IO with AOL, do it with Yahoo, do it with MSN, and it would be a bunch of these direct deals with various content creators or content aggregators. And it would be, maybe I'm in the auto category. Hey Yahoo, please could I have your endemic auto content? And that was how in the very early days that targeting and contextual targeting really started to kick off. But when you talk about scale, what we observed is as the industry matured, they would start to choke out on scale unless a marketer was willing to do a very large number of direct deals. We're talking pre-programmatic days, or certainly the days where we were starting to transition into programmatic. And so what we observed was the industry really started to lean into audience targeting, and that was to increase the scale off the back of what was available contextually, largely prohibited by the number of deals that you were able to do and the number of contexts that were available within a given publisher. And so, and I know it's much more complex than that. I'm probably being a little reductive, but I see early days of internet as very contextually focused. We pivoted into audience targeting, which we've seen right up until now. And then if we get back to your question, I think what we're also observing is the industry now leaning back into contextual for a variety of reasons, which I believe we'll talk about in a moment. But the difference now is the scale is there. So you no longer need to do a bunch of different deals. You can work with partners like IAS, and we essentially have the ability to classify content through the breadth of the internet, and be able to find those contexts that are right for your brand and help you avoid ones that might not be. Now, obviously, that's also essentially scale is the available content times the audience that visits it. But we do know that when it comes to content, there's no shortage of various content online. And it's really going to be about how niche are you getting. If you're getting super niche, you might want to have a scale conversation. But for the vast majority of content that a given brand might want to find itself adjacent to, scale is there like never before. And in fact, that's the key difference between contextual now versus contextual of the past, is the scale of availability.
Yeah. Well, let's touch on what it is. It's not only the ability to address contextually content in a way that wasn't possible. The tools have gotten better, but there's also the drive of brands. They have needs that are really driving rediscovery of context. And one of those, I mean, we have our video ad spend study, and one of the key takeaways then in that study conducted this spring was that 51% of brands and buyers are relying on contextual targeting as a strategy to better manage their privacy concerns. So it's not just, how can I manage that brand in the context of content? It's actually a bigger picture of how can I do targeting in a way that is, ultimately more privacy centric for consumers. Are you seeing that? What are the kind of, drivers of interest right now?
So in a nutshell, we absolutely are. That stat that you gave from the video ad spend study rings really consistent with our experiences, both with our clients, but also just broadly some of the trends we're observing in the industry. And it's interesting because I think you start to ask, okay, why? Why is there a sudden interest in contextual? The technology has existed for a little while, but there's now a surge of interest in this space.
Yeah.
And I believe there are at least three key drivers of this. Most of them, well, actually, all of these three relating to privacy. So I think you're looking at regulatory changes. So whether you're talking GDPR, CCPA, a bunch of other regions and countries are now looking at privacy initiatives to protect the privacy of consumers. That has an impact. That actually slightly degrades the ability to accurately audience target. We're looking, so that's regulatory. We also see device level changes. So, for example, Apple has changed its stance on opt-in, opt-out regarding IDFA, the ID for advertisers within its devices. So, essentially, the ability to track across this type of device, using Apple as just one example, there are other examples, But at the device level, it's becoming a little bit more difficult to get a clear picture into the audience because of and rightfully so, because of the privacy focus that we have. And then lastly is probably the one that consumes most oxygen in the room when we're talking about privacy, and that's cookies. And clearly there were a lot of headlines recently. Google, with regard to its plans to sunset the Chrome cookie or cookies within the Chrome browser, extended the deadline on that sunset. So the industry has a bit more time, but it has the exact same effect as the last two things. We know it will happen. It already has happened in some browsers. And all three of these things essentially make it a little bit more difficult to accurately audience target, at least do so in the ways that we traditionally have. And so with that, you kind of get two industry reactions to that. One in which we're deeply embedded, and one which is a little bit removed from our day-to-day business. So the one that we don't touch a lot would be, there's a focus on identity resolution. Is there an alternate way to cookies? Is there a different key that we could use to understand someone's identity in a privacy-friendly way? And there's a number of initiatives on that. But I would argue even the bigger of the two is contextual targeting. And marketers are saying, well, how can I effectively target? Effectively is a key word. Effectively target without breaching anyone's privacy. And context is, by many measures, proving to be the way that they could do that. And so, really long answer to your question, but we've seen really similar data to the 51% of brands and buyers really relying on contextual. And I don't see that slowing down. I see the industry really snowballing on this.
You know, the kind of red thread that runs through all that is the notion that there's a consumer leaned in, you know, involved with content, and that's a powerful thing. We've always known that. But what are the insights you've gotten about consumers and that kind of intimacy with content and what that can do for brands? You know, what do consumers think of contextual targeting?
Yeah, and we've got some data to lean on, and I believe there's also some debate on what consumers perceive. At least in my opinion, I believe most consumers of online content understand that there's a value exchange, and the value exchange I'm talking about is, I'm going to get some sort of content or functionality, and it's free because it's ad supported. And by the way, this isn't new. P&G literally invented the radio serial in 1919. They inserted ads into essentially soap opera content on the radio. You know, later sort of migrating to TV, and that's why it's known as the soap opera. As I'm sure you're aware, they were selling detergents, etc. But the idea was people would get this content for free because it was ad supported. We know that much of the open internet runs on the same model. It's either going to be subscription, you pay a fee, you get no or limited ads, or it's free and you'll get ads. And I believe that most people understand that. And so if you agree with that statement, then from the consumer perspective, you would say consumers understand there will be an ad for if I'm checking news or I'm checking my email, I get this service for free, there's going to be an ad. That ad may as well be relevant for me. You know, you mentioned I'm a triathlete. Show me ads for men's shoes. You show me some women's shoes, it's not going to work out so well for me being interested in your message. Show that relevance is what really drives it forward. But if you take that and then you look at the data, we ran a study recently called the Congruence Effect, and we found that 74%, so fully 3/4 of consumers, want the ads they get online to match the content that they're viewing. And so this starts to shift it away from, is it relevant to me, but pushes it to, is the ad relevant to the context of what I'm consuming at that point in time. We found it really consistent across categories. So we showed people different scenarios. So for example, with an entertainment article, 79% of people said they wanted an entertainment ad. There was an investment article, they wanted a financial services ad, 78%. Restaurant and food ads. So when people see that the ad matches the content, they are largely very favorable towards that. And I believe that most do understand that the value exchange is there and want the ad to be relevant.
Yep. Let's talk about control a little bit more, because I think that's such an interesting, you know, it's a shift in how the whole space is thinking about it. As you said at the very beginning, it was initially about avoidance and block list, right? Remember our days at Yahoo? It was like, what's the keyword block list? It's gotten much more sophisticated, and it kind of begs the question of how control can be different based on the user engagement model of the content. So something that I think is so interesting is IAS recently you've been partnering with Twitter, right? Here's this experience. It's very feed-based, news focused. It's the news of the moment. What does control for brands and managing adjacency in an environment like that? How does that differ from a platform like YouTube that is very video focused? A lot of DIY content, a lot of video from creators. Maybe contrast those two publishing
Yeah.
worlds, and how do you do it?
I mean, this is something that's very close to our heart. Many of our customers report they choose us because of our advantage in having a relationship with a wide variety of the prop platforms. And so you just gave an example of two. You talked about Twitter, you talked about YouTube, and I think that they're great examples because it helps to illustrate that every proprietary platform has its own mechanisms which need to be accounted for. So the Twitter feed is a hyper dynamic, super quick feed of content, and the content is text, it's images, it's video. I believe you can do audio only, and it's all within this one feed for the user and for the brand for its adjacencies. And so you're talking about speed of processing and understanding the environment of an ad exposure when you're talking about an environment like Twitter. And by the way, full credit to Twitter, because they know that marketers value control over those adjacencies, and so they've really invested effort to work with us and give the marketers what they want for that environment, which is fast-paced, breakneck to say the least, and multimodal in terms of the content.
Yep.
And so speed is largely the name of the game, and accuracy with regard to a feed environment like that. And then when you talk about YouTube, where it's a little bit more specifically, I guess a lot more specifically focused on video, it's actually a great other example, because with the video focus, firstly, there's user-generated content, there's more professional content, there are channels, there are videos. There's a lot to consider. There's premium content, which has been flagged as premium, and there's a broader long tail of content. And then I guess one thing that's really similar is just the sheer veracity, the number of video content that's added on a daily basis to YouTube, I believe is now spanning into the years. There's a load of content, and it also is not slowing down.
Yep.
But like, if you look at an environment like that, then you start to ask yourself questions like, what are the channels, what are the videos that are safe and suitable for my brand, given that there is highly salient and potentially like user-generated low-quality content that's there potentially. How do I control for that to make sure I'm next to the stuff that's going to work well for my brand? But then also, how can I target? And then you also start to say, especially for video content right now, can I have those types of protections or controls within CTV environments, being one of the fastest growing media right now, and which, by the way, IAS offers what we believe is the world's first brand safety and suitability solution for CTV, and it operates on that YouTube inventory. So all of that is to say, and you could start to talk about all sorts of emerging prop platforms, whether it's TikTok, etc. But the key thing to your question is every prop platform has its own unique elements which need to be accounted for, and every prop platform needs a solution that's customized for that environment, so that marketers can both avoid and find the content that's going to work out best for them. And that's the broader answer.
Yep. So you mentioned CTV, topic near and dear to my heart. It is getting tons of focus. It's so interesting. It's like terms like contextual in the realm of CTV, terms like programmatic are also incredibly loaded. It is a world unto itself in terms of transactional models, given that it's so premium. So I would love to have you share, going back to the heritage round around verification, what's the current state of fraud in CTV? And if you could talk for a minute, CTV is a very specific, it is a device. It is the big ass screen on your wall versus OTT, which is TV-like content. It can be on a CTV or a smart TV, but when people talk about OTT, it can also be TV-like content on mobile, on desktop. So it's the whole realm of screen experiences, and the fraud implications are incredibly different in those three realms. Talk about how you're working with brands to give comfort that CTV can be safe, can be protected from fraud? Because, I think the challenge is when people think about television content, if it's sold direct from a publisher, that's one thing. If it's sold in an open exchange, things can get different. So maybe share a little bit your learnings there.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, as you said, is near and dear to many in the industry's heart right now. And I think it all starts with consumer behavior, and we'll get through some of the things that you mentioned. But I think it's just worth acknowledging. We all know it, but to say out loud, the height of the pandemic, shortly after the WHO declared it a pandemic,
Yep.
we saw a period of approximately 2 months where maybe there was 2 years or more of accelerated adoption. We have people staying at home, there was stay-at-home guidance, their general media consumption ballooned, and CTV became the go-to for the living room wall, as you said. It just exploded over a short period of time. And I've said this in public forums before, and I'll say it here. Like, I believe that it was an acceleration rather than a trend change. Like, I don't believe this wasn't going to happen. I believe that the adoption was inevitable, but it was vastly accelerated. And so what that does when you start to talk about fraud within this environment, the general rule for the business that we're in when you talk about fraud is that fraudsters follow the money, but the money follows the eyeballs. And so we know that marketers seek to connect with audiences where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, and during the course of 2020, that was CTV. As marketers piled dollars into that, then the fraudsters seek to defraud, and they largely view CTV as an easy hit. That they view it as a low cost. I'm unlikely to get caught. There's not a lot of downside to me trying this. The CPMs are very high, and there's an influx of buyers into this market. And the only thing I might say and backtrack a little is it's also worth acknowledging. I know most of us on this call are aware of it, but just say it out loud. Is that there's a couple of flavors of CTV. There's subscription, which currently drives the vast majority of CTV viewership. Think Netflix, pay my fee, I'm not seeing ads. But the fastest growing part of CTV is actually ad supported, and that's off the back of the trends that I just observed. So ad supported is starting to become a much bigger piece of the pie. We see adoption of CTV continuing to grow, and we see marketers piling into it. And I think by extension, there's also, when we talk about pandemic and shifting behaviors, so CTV is one thing, making sure that as it increasingly gets transacted programmatically, that you're protected from things like fraud, that you can control for things like brand safety. That's important because programmatic is opaque. But also we saw adoption of like audio models over the same period of time. I mean, Clubhouse is one example, a unique, fairly novel way of people to get together. I'm not sure they've quite figured out what the monetization model is, but we know in the same way that the marketers are following people to CTV environments, they're following in those audio environments too. And we've seen this with more established audio players like your Spotify's and Pandora's of the world, where they've really had flavors of ad-supported model, and they've been really monitoring this for some time. But I'm really interested about where audio is going, because it kind of fell off a cliff for a while. A lot of people's audio consumption was commute based. When they stopped commuting, they stopped listening to their podcast, they stopped doing these things, but then it picked back up as people found how audio fits into their post-pandemic lifestyle. And I think there's still, particularly when we talk about going beyond verification, there's still a lot of traction there within that audio space. How can we professionalize the way in which we target and give a relevant ad to someone within an audio environment? I think there's some headway to be made there.
Cool. Well, I want to bring us home with the question that I ask a lot of people, which is, okay, in the Marlow household, what is the favorite streaming TV show of the moment?
Well, if you ask my 4-year-old son, he's all about a character called Blippi on YouTube. He loves Blippi, and then I'd say Blaze and the Monster Machines is another one that's a household favorite. But Netflix is big. Honestly, we've got subscriptions to basically all of them. We're pretty big users of CTV, but my son is the tip of the spear there. He loves his fun and educational programs on the CTV.
It continues to be the babysitter of the world. So yeah, man, I'm with you. Well, thank you so much, Tony, for taking time to talk with us at IAB there. To learn more about brand safety and suitability, please visit IAB.com. We have a interesting research piece called Understanding Brand Safety and Suitability in a Contemporary Media Landscape. My name is Eric John. Thank you so much for watching. Tony, we'll see you hopefully not in the Hudson very soon, but someday soon.
Eric, good to see you, and thank you so much for having us on.
All right, man. Take care.